I would like to introduce Tero Mustonen, who is with our member Snow Change in Finland. He's also the regional representative for the circumpolar Arctic with our council in the ICC consortium. Tero is going to share about winter seiners and climate change and preservation of traditional and local knowledge in his context. Tero himself is a fisherman as well, so it's always a pleasure to have you with us, Tero. Over to you.
Polly and dear friends, greetings from the Boreal North and where it's actually now warm. It's plus 20 today, so usually when we meet or discuss fisheries, I'm always starting with the minus 25 note, but now we are actually back to life. Of course, I want to thank the organizers and ICCA consortium for inviting Snow Change back to review some of the things we are doing and connect with this important day and the UN conference in Lisbon and the pre-actions and the actions and discussions before that. I guess I have essentially 3 points, and I have been speaking on these points before, but I wanted to try to bring something of a new solutions to you from the north, using the example of our own fishery, and then try to look at some of the points of how do we maintain fisheries, how do we maintain culturally based engagements with the oceans and in our case also the large lake ecosystems, and also what's going on. That's of course climate change in our case. Before I say anything else, let's clear something out of the way that we never discuss. One of the years and years of engaging with this topic of small-scale fisheries and so on has to do with the fact that there is a large portion of the global south which is completely dependent on, and they are of course highly in need of support in terms of communal fisheries, artisanal fisheries, and SSF fisheries. And many people in the global south may think that places like Finland or Norway or Canada, it's all fine and dandy and everything has been solved. And that may be on the big society side, but those of us who are engaged in the community-based and small-scale fisheries, of course, we are not identical or don't suffer from everything that's around the world, but we are often in the same bracket. Our fish has no value. We are earning one, for example, in our, if we would sell this to the wholesale, our income is about €1 per 1 kilo. We are facing a lot of the issues to do with no markets, no rights, and the special context for Boreal and Arctic, especially in the context of traditional and indigenous communities, is that because the area is so remote, Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Northern Finland, Eastern Finland, and Siberia, of course, before the war, many communities are fully dependent on natural food production systems, out of which fishery is often 1/3, and in some cases 60 to 70% of people's life and food security. And this has now been made much worse by the horrible war that started in February, and this has had a cascading range of impacts on food production around the world. But one of the aspects we do not discuss often is the fact that it has also greatly altered the Northern Russian and Siberian indigenous communities, and they are now even further dependent on their own fisheries because of a lot of the trade, infrastructure, and many other things have been affected in Russia as well as in Ukraine, without going further into that. But let me share some ideas, and I hope to welcome some questions perhaps as well over the next few minutes. Before we do that, I'll just show you what's going on. Who are we and how does it look like? I hope people can now see the photo. So that's how it looks like. Can people see the ice-based photo?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. So that's our communal harvest. That's Lauri Hämäläinen and our team on the ice and harvesting Vendes, which is the salmonid schooling fish that has been the target of Puruvesi seining for 700 years. I'll stop sharing. We can go back to the photo a bit later. And as you can see in the photo, the way we are harvesting and maintaining this small-scale fishery and food web, for the lack of better term, is fully dependent on ice. We have the right to be cold is a sentence that one of the Inuit leaders, Sheila Watt-Cloutier, gave forwards a long time ago. And now that we look at the world of today, climate change is altering our home, our fundamental principles of how the system works. For example, I was raised up on the ice and fishing with the old guys and the old fishermen, and I learned from them that the winter seining could start in middle of November with the right ice conditions in 1968, 50 years ago. And it ended 15th of May. So we had a chance to harvest for 6-7 months on stable, safe, and secure conditions. We were feeding, or this fishery was feeding whole villages, providing jobs, and maintaining an unbroken biocultural landscape. Finnish national epic Kalevala was collected in this village, and so on and so on. And today, in 2020, for example, we started our harvest around early March, and it ended 30th of March. So at its worst, the Arctic and the Boreal are hit by impacts which are altering the whole ecosystem. Let's stop there for a second. How does it feel, and what does it matter? Without going further, all of you know the headlines of the melting ice and polar bears in trouble and so on and so on. We don't convey enough the fact that the fundamentals of the life in the north are now under shift. We can't travel on the ice safely. We lose people, we lose machinery, and we are not able to catch the fish safely because the fish behave co-dependent on the ice. And that's why it's a very, of course, severe time in the Arctic, on top of everything else, the war, inflation, high fuel prices, poverty in the villages, and so on, alcoholism. So that's the wonderful, depressing start to my context, but just to remind people that the Pacific and the Arctic and the Boreal are the warmest or highest warming territories on Earth. We will look at +8 mean temperature change by the end of the century if we are not able to cope with these things. So let's quickly come back to solutions. What are we doing in snow change? What are we doing as a fishing community? And what are we doing internationally to fight for our fishery and rights and way of life? Well, first of all, when we are trying to preserve this unique traditional knowledge that's embedded in the fishery, one of the most important things we have succeeded in snow change has been to bring young women, Karoliina Lehtimäki, and young men now on the ice. So we have implemented a master apprentice program successfully. We are self-financing that, and we have now a young cohort of fishers on the ice, especially the women, between 25 and 31. I'm of course of the older stock on the way out. I'm 46, and I'm so happy and joyful that these young people have chosen to come to Snow Change and work with us. We are using some of the labels to defend the fishery. I have earlier also sometimes mentioned that European Union has provided us with a geographical indicator for the quality of the fish and the way we fish. the fishermen were able to register the fishery under Finnish UNESCO National Heritage List because of the oral histories, traditional knowledge, and for the lack of better term, engagement we have maintained for 700 years at least on record with the lake and the fishery. We are working on ban on trawling. Not all of you know, but actually in the freshwaters, trawling has also been practiced in Finnish lakes. This is madness, of course. And that's why we have fought in Puruvesi, which is in eastern Finland, to keep that trawl away so that the people have a life and the fish have a chance. The final note that I give you today, or observation, has to do also with the oceans. So 2 points. Behind me, you can see a peatland. Our lakes and rivers are fully dependent on their catchment areas, and many catchments are consisting of peatlands, which are then in their turn like sponges. They provide natural flood alleviation, they cleanse our waters, and they are also biodiversity hotspots. That's why we launched 5 years ago a landscape rewilding program throughout Finland, over 65 sites now, affecting 50,000 hectares of ICCA territories, to restore and nurture lakes, rivers, and peatlands back to life. Because if we don't have clean water and survival of cold-dependent fish, there's not much purpose to keep on talking about these things. We are now partnering with ocean rewilding. We are starting some work and exchanges, for example, in the UK, close to the southern shores on the Isle of Wight. There is a organization that works on an area called Solent, and they are pioneering capacity to restore coastal habitats in the Atlantic. And we would like to take this further into the Baltic as well, where we are then, of course, connected to. So we are slowly looking at how moving from terrestrial peatlands and lake and river ecosystems and our fisheries into how do we heal the oceans? What can we do to restore at least the coastlines and interconnected species like salmon who travel the ocean and come back home to spawn? This is not a trivial task, and one of the steps we have taken in that is that we detected the very first microplastics in the Arctic last year. We are working with the UK team on the question of how do we rewild and restore community-led fisheries on the coast and also salt marshes and things like that. And then we are also speaking with partners in Australia and in the Pacific region on coral reefs and many other things. And finally, a last note of a little bit of an advertisement. The experience that Finnish people and Sami and others from Snow Change want to bring you is that you are not alone. We may be at the lid of the world, but we hear you. And on many issues, not on everything, but on many issues, we can find solidarity. We can find common ground because the system is the problem, not the communities. That's why we will open up this autumn another round of something called Oceans-Wide Relief. It's an Indigenous-led small grants program that will be able to provide up to $10,000 immediately to coastal and indigenous fishing communities in the Pacific and in the wider area on a fast track. Already this year, we have financed small-scale fisheries and community-led work devoted to fisheries in Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Chile, Taiwan, or we are working with the Taiwan connection that Hugo will talk about, as well as New Zealand with the Maori fisheries. So we have found out that all of us are small. Nobody has lots of resources, but it's exactly this kind of webinar. It's exactly these kind of networks that we are needing now before we go into Lisbon. And Snow Change, as a whole network of communities, as well as our own fishery, wants to chip in. That's why we will open up Indigenous-led grants for communities, most likely in September. for the whole next 6 months. And we welcome applications, and we challenge all parties to join to support those that are most in harm's way, both in the North and in the global South. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tero. I think that's a great practical call to action, invitation to some of our funding partners and others on the call who have access to financial resources and might be able to support that program and related programs as well. So I think we might have time for one short question. If anyone would like to add anything, there was a great comment in the chat box from Alison Nielsen in Portugal. So maybe have a look at that, Tero, after if you want to share a response by chat. Vivienne has shared a question in the chat. Would you like to ask it, Vivienne?
Yes, thank you, Tero. That was an inspiring talk. Thank you very much. We also are interested in bringing the youth and the young fishers, very strong into the small-scale fisheries in Costa Rica and Mesoamerica. And I was wondering, how and what strategies do you use for motivating them that have so much innovation and energy? Of course, they have so many temptations, oriented towards development. In our case, so many environmental NGOs saying, you should be ashamed of being a fisher, you should not be a fisher anymore, change your livelihood to something else. And we are moving, but very slowly. Can you share with us some of those strategies that you have used? Thank you.
Holly is our boss lady, and I know I don't have a lot of time, so I'll be very short. Pride, self-esteem, and also salary that is equal to some job that they would choose otherwise. These are not easy things to do, but we succeeded, for example, through the Master Apprentice program. However, it has to be focusing on species that are something we can catch. It has to be community-led. And I would never have believed we will have those 25 to 31-year-old fishers. But one of them, Lauri, for example, sent me an email or phoned, I don't remember, and said, I have been thinking for 5 years what to do in my life. And I have chosen to become a fisherman. Can you help me? So maybe Allah or God exists and he sent these people. But I think the way of running that system globally has to do with the fact that it has to be about a future for these young people, and the pride, self-esteem, and some kind of safety, especially for women. We can't have any abuse in that, because we know that if we destroy this round, they won't come back. So I'm happy we have exchanged a lot, and I can send you some notes afterwards as well. But thank you for this question. And let me summarize it. If we don't have young fishermen, we don't have a fishery, and then the trawlers will come. So I think that can be applied all through the world. Thank you.
Thanks for the great question, Vivienne, and Tero, the excellent response. Maybe, Arju, if you can find I think a web story and an interactive multimedia story that Snow Change produced a year or two ago, maybe we can share that in the chat as well. Tero, there's another question in the chat, if you're able to respond in the chat. From Joanna, our next speaker, actually. She's asking, how do public policies on fisheries work in your country? So maybe concerning Finland, that's probably quite a complex response, but if you're able to share a little bit in response in the chat, that would be great. So thank you so much, Tero, for that excellent presentation. Always a really good reality check with the very contemporary issues with the war in Ukraine, the deep cultural impacts of climate breakdown, the key message of you're not alone, as we're all in this together in supportive communities on the front lines of these challenges, and always very inspiring to hear about Snow Change's very creative responses and forms of adaptation to our current challenges.